I find it, so astonishing. I get critics, even from the right, that are saying, we think critical race theory is horrible. We think DEI is antithetical to the Constitution, but we're really concerned that Rufo is getting rid of them within public institutions. It's like, what are you people for? I mean, how do you go from that premise to that conclusion?
Chris, sorry to interrupt. Just to steelman their argument, and I have seen that argument made.
Please.
Their argument, I think, is they're uncomfortable with using the power of government to do those things. That is their concern.
Totally, but that is like the most absurd concern possible, because they're uncomfortable with using the power of the government to regulate the government. These are government schools. These are government institutions, and so the only people who can regulate them are are government agents, essentially. And so what my argument is if you say that legislators channeling the sentiments and desires of their voters are not allowed to regulate public institutions, what you're saying is that the supreme power in our country is not the people, is not the legislators who represent them, but the permanent bureaucracies and the permanent bureaucrats that administer our institutions. And so it is fundamentally an anti-democratic argument that they're making. They're saying the people have no right to regulate their government. That is completely backwards to the vision of the American founding, where the people were the ultimate arbiter, and the government only existed to secure the rights of the people. Now we're getting into a kind of tyrannical model. Ultimately, what I think is important for people to realize is that there's a distinction between ideology and politics. And my contention that I've advanced and has gotten a lot of pushback, but I think is ultimately still true, is that our universities have been overly ideologized, but insufficiently politicized. And so what that means is that we have, critical theory, postmodernism, gender ideology driving intellectual life in the departments. But we have this fiction that universities are neutral spaces that should not be governed by anyone, and that certainly shouldn't be intruded upon by legislators and taxpayers and voters who fund them, charter them, and pay for them. What I'm saying is that it's time for public universities to be governed in the best interest of the public, and to be governed specifically by the legislators who are elected by voters to fund, oversee, and administer these institutions. Academics want to be free to push their ideology at all times, but they also want to be free of democratic oversight. I hope that to reverse that, I hope that the opposite becomes true over time.
Chris, and let's focus on the Ivy Leagues, the Harvards, the Columbias, etc. These are private institutions. Correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm not particularly au fait. Okay. So what do we do with a private institution? Because that's not governmental. So what do we do with them?
Well, this is actually a fun question, and I'm glad you asked, because I've been working with some other scholars and policy analysts on exactly this question. And there's a couple things we can do. I mean, private universities are subsidized to the gills by the federal government through student loans and student loan guarantees. And so I think that you could reform student loans and make universities liable in part for student loan defaults. So if a student racks up $250,000 in student loans, getting a gender studies degree from, private university A, and then can't pay it back, well, why isn't the university on the hook to repay that, say, half of that loan? So create some financial incentives for them to be more competitive and more judicious in how they run their programs. Second, what you can do, and what I'm recommending the next president of the United States to do, if it's a Republican, is to launch a Department of Justice and Department of Education investigation into all of the Ivy League universities to investigate them for illegal and unconstitutional racial discrimination in hiring and admissions. And so what we would do is essentially take what the lawyers did with the Harvard lawsuit, which established that Harvard's admissions policies were unconstitutional, and then expand it to all of the prestige universities, using the power of federal investigation to procure documents, to put a few hundred lawyers on the case, and in a sense to embarrass, to expose, to punish, and then to take corrective legal action against universities who are violating the Constitution. I think that would make waves. I think that would make huge changes in behavior. And I also think that federal funding for these universities, they get billions of dollars. Private universities get billions of dollars in grants and in programmatic funding and other kind of federal financial schemes. Why don't we tie that funding to principles of open speech and debate, principles of civic discourse, principles of non-discrimination, and in a sense say, if you don't fulfill the basic mission of the university, being a home for open discourse, having a standard of civil debate, you no longer qualify for federal funds. This is how it works in almost every other domain of life. If you do not follow the basic rules, you do not qualify for special benefits. And so I think there's a lot that can be done to tame these private universities. And one thing I've learned in particular fighting in academia, academics are not very, they're not economically productive, right? They're not, creating, iPhones or whatever. What they trade on is prestige. And that's really their full, they always put their full, the famous Jacob Urofsky professor of whatever at Yale University, the famous line from Jason Stanley. And so what I've learned by kind of, you laugh at that, it's kind of funny, but actually it signals a great vulnerability. If you can attack the prestige and attack the reputation and undermine the prestige and reputation of individual academics, but academic institutions as a whole, that is a very powerful method for getting change.